Indicates arrays 1 indicates that tomorrow we're doing arrays 2. So this is going to be kind of like a two-parter. Today's the reason why I said today's lecture might be really short is because this first half is hopefully a lot of review. So I'll probably go through it at a fairly quick pace, and then tomorrow we're going to talk about more like array methods and things that maybe you haven't seen before. Arrays. So what's an array? Type of. How do we check if something is an array? And some very basic kind of properties or some basic useful methods within arrays. Okay. Oh god. Oh, what is it? Okay. All right. So I mean, hopefully by this point, no one's like surprised by like an array anymore. Array's basic syntax obviously is going to be these square brackets. Every opening square bracket has to have a closing square bracket, and it holds a list of things, or as we call it, kind of more, maybe more precisely, elements. And every element is separated by a comma. That's it. That's an array. Arrays, for the most part, can have infinite length. The only thing to kind of keep in mind about an array versus other data types is in an array, order matters a lot, right? And it's one of those things where if you're using an array, then you need to kind of always assume that order matters. If order doesn't matter, there's probably maybe another way you can represent the data. But just for now, just keep in mind that in an array, order matters quite a bit. And so because it is a list, it is a sequential order list. There's a first thing, there's a next thing, there's a next thing after that, etc. One of the things that we'll kind of talk about a little bit more when we talk about path by reference and path by values next week is this distinction between what we call primitive data types and complex data types. For now, just keep in mind that complex data types are complex because they are able to be changed. Okay. An array is a complex data type, and in JavaScript, most complex data types are actually objects. And so when we see an array, in our minds, we think of it as kind of this unique data type, whatever it is. But under the hood, if you kind of peel it back far enough, it is just like a really fancy object in JavaScript. So that's why when you do type of and you feed in an array, you actually get object, which is not incorrect. It is correct. Deep down at its base level, an array is an object. And so the best way to figure out how to test whether or not something is an array is through this method called array.isArray. Notice how the first array is capitalized, right? Which means that for something that's capitalized, what is it if the first letter of it is capitalized? It's a class, right? So an array class is something that's built into JavaScript. And what we're doing here is we're actually saying, we're actually going to JavaScript and saying, hey, I know you have some built-in stuff that helps me figure out if something is an array. And so the best way to test whether or not something is an array is to go into this class, go into this method, and pass in whatever it is you want to test, right? This is just to distinguish that if you use type of an array and type of an object, you'll get back object in both cases. If you do array.isArray and you pass in an array and you pass in an object, you're going to get back a Boolean of true or false, and it will be kind of more correct. The array will be considered an array. The object will not be considered an array. So this is just something that's kind of built into JavaScript that helps you kind of make that distinction. Bracket access. So hopefully everyone knows we've done it before with a lot of the for loops, right? An array, because it's an ordered list, there's the position of it matters a lot. Every list always starts off at the 0th position or 0th index, and we go up, one at a time until we reach the very end of the array. Because of that, the highest array is always going to be the length minus 1, because we start at 0, right? So everything kind of shifts to the left 1. And the way to access any particular element is we use another square bracket, but now this does not define an array, but rather this means I want to access, and we pass in a number into the bracket notation, and that number is going to be the index. And so when I do names index 0, what it does is it's saying, give me the element at the 0th position of this names array. right? So when I pass in any of these things, it's going to go into the names array, and it's going to give me back the element or the thing at this position. And so in this case, we only have 4 things. So the indexes, the possible indexes are 0, 1, 2, and 3. This is review, right? For people? Yes? No? Okay. Okay, so if the bracket notation is how we access an element, well, if we want to reassign the value, if we want to change something, if we want to say, hey, I don't want your third element to be this, I want it to be this other thing instead, well, it's not any different than how we've done assignment so far in any other kind of medium or through any other methods, right? We just use this equal sign. The equal sign makes says, hey, whatever was in the 0th position in this names array, set it, or rather replace it with this thing instead. And so whereas before we had maybe a names array with 3 things in it, now we're just replacing the element at each index with this new element. So that when we log out the element at the end of it, we actually get back a brand new array with 3 different things, right? So bracket notation, I guess at a high level summary, bracket notation, if you're using it without the equal operator, it just means fetch, get me that element. And then if you do use an equal operator, it means replace that element with whatever's on the right-hand side of the equal sign. Any questions so far about anything I've talked about with arrays? Make sense? Good, like high level, make sense? Okay, great. Then we should be done like 2 more slides. The other thing that all arrays kind of comes built with is something called dot length. You probably use it already when you use a for loop to iterate through either a string dot length or an array dot length. Dot length just tells you how long something is. The length obviously starts at 1. Or actually no, sorry, it could be 0, but like the length of the array is just kind of how humanly how we count. There are 5 things in this array, so the length is going to be 5. And it comes built into all arrays, so you don't need to kind of worry about writing it yourself. Whenever we make an array, what we're really doing is we're making an instance of the capital A array class. And so if you look into the JavaScript kind of their source code or in their array class code, you'll notice that it will have something that says every instance of the array class is going to have a dot length property, and that's going to give you how many elements are in the array, or how long this array or this list is. And so dot length is something that exists in every single array. And then we'll talk about some basic functions built into arrays, right? So kind of like dot length, these are pre-built for you, so you feel free to just use them. We'll talk about a few basic ones here. There's a lot more. If you're curious about any of them, read the documentation on them. It's probably the best way because a lot of them have some nuances that are kind of like not surprising, but they're like, oh, like that's a cool nifty feature. So let's take a look at. So this is a typo here. This is bad, by the way. Mu is a reserved word. Don't ignore that. So dot push. Dot push basically just allows you to take one or more elements and add them to the end of the array. That's pretty much it, right? Imagine you have an array, and when you push, you're literally shoving things onto the end of the array. And what it does is it gives you back the new length of the array. One thing to just note here is that sometimes you don't care about like the new length, right? You want to just add something to an array. In that case, it's easy for you to just do names.push, right? You don't always have to capture the output of the function if you don't need the output of the function. So, but regardless of whether or not you're capturing it, dot push will always be giving back to you the length of the new array. So if you want to use it, use it. If you don't, don't. But dot push essentially allows you to add things to the end of the array. And then the converse somewhat of that is the dot pop method. Dot pop then removes the last element and only the last element from the very end of the array. So it's going to change the existing array. But what it's also going to do is it's also going to return back whatever it was that it just removed. And usually the reason people use this is because they want to do something with the last thing that got removed, and so the function is built in to handle to give you back the latest thing that was removed. So if this is our initial array and we do names.pop, what we actually do is if we console log out the original array and we console out Jefferson, which is storing what the function returned, we'll see our initial array now is only 2 things because we got rid of the last thing. And then what the return value was going to be Thomas, which was the thing that was removed. So .pop just removes the last element in the array and gives you back whatever was just removed. .shift is just like .pop because it basically removes the first element and it shifts everything over by 1. So with this, it's obviously pretty easy to understand in terms of we're just removing things. Notice how it also gives back the first thing that was removed. But whereas when we use .pop, like nothing before changed, like the indexes are all the same for everything else in the list. If we use .shift, the indexes for everyone else now shifts over 1 to the left, right? All the indexes decrease by 1. So whereas if you use .pop, you can be pretty confident it's not going to change the rest of the array, maybe minus the length property. If you use .shift, just realize now that every index is going to be different than what it was before. So it all kind of makes sense, right? Like if the first person in line leaves, everyone else automatically moves up 1 place in line, right? And then unshift, adds it to the beginning of the array.
And does it also change the index of all the other?
Yep, that's right. So imagine if someone just kind of cut in line and you're all in line, someone comes very front, like I'm the next person, now everyone else is now going to be 1 spot behind where they normally were, right? Like almost think of it as like the position, like the index is tied exactly to the way you see the array. And so if something shifts the array over by 1, then by definition, all the positions are going to be shifted back too. And so this also gives you back the length of the new thing that we added. So basically, the rule of thumb here is based on the ones we've seen so far, if something adds something to an array, we return the new length of the array. If something removes something from an array, we return the thing that got removed. As a general kind of general pattern for the 4 methods we've seen so far. A few more. Index of. Index of is pretty nice. Index of is basically a search function for an array. And what index of is you call it and you pass in an element, and it will tell you the index of the first element that matches the thing you're passing in, right? When I say first, what I mean is you could easily have multiple things. Like if my names list was 3 things long and they were all George, 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 and I asked you, hey, give me the index of George. Index of is going to give me the index of the first match of George, right? Going from left to right. It searches in sequential order. And so it's going to give me back the index of the first match. And if it doesn't find a match, it's going to give me back -1, right? And the reason why it gives back -1 is because it's theoretically not possible to have a -1 index. And therefore, I know that means no match was found, right? It can give me back a 0, right? A 0 index is very possible. It's just the first thing probably to match, and then good, and I go home. But if nothing is found, then it gives me back -1. So index of is basically like a search function, if you will, for an array. Okay, a few more. Slice. Slice is an array method too, and what it does is it basically helps you create a copy, or not. It helps you create, I guess, it creates a new array, but it creates it based on like a subsegment of the array. So what this does is let's see if I'm getting this correct or not. If you read the documentation on this, you'll notice that like these are all kind of like they all start sounding the same after a while. And the next one is called .splice, and that's how I sometimes get them a little bit confused too. Okay, so we have an original array of three things. When we do names.slice 1, 2, what it does is the first number we give it is where we start, the index of where we start, and then the second number is going to be where we stop, but we stop before we get there. Right? So in this case, when I do names.slice 1, 2, what this is saying is, all right, first step, create a new array. Okay? Second step, in the new array, put in whatever was in index 1. In this case, John. The next step is say, okay, stop before you get to index 2. Well, index 2 is Thomas. So if I put in John already, and then I stop before I get Thomas, then what this does is it basically creates a new array with only one thing. In this case, John. If, on the other hand, this had been slice 1, comma 3, then we would be creating a new array. We would say start index 1. Start putting things into the new array until we get to index 3. So it would give you John, and then Thomas, and then it will stop. So basically, slice is a way for you to create a copy of the array, but only a subsegment of the array. And actually, one fun thing is that if you don't pass in any numbers into the slice function, if you just do names.slice empty, you just invoke it, it will give you back a brand new copy of the entire array. So unless you tell it where to start and where to stop, it will give you back the entire array. But if you do want to tell it where to start, where to stop, that's kind of the way that function parses the arguments. Yeah, do you have a question?
Yeah, what if you want to combine several different slices of an array? So like 1 to 2, but then 1 to 3 to 5, and then 7 to 9.
Yeah, so what you want to do there is that you need to create each one of those separately, and then you need to join them all together. Yeah. And this is just to show you. So, all right, so this is kind of the amalgamation of everything we just looked at, right? Names array, names copy dot slice. We basically just create a brand new copy of all three things. So we have an array that looks identical to this. In this new array, we're changing the last element to Paul. We're adding Ringo to the end of it, and so then we have George, John, Paul, and Ringo. So it's just kind of a way for us to make use of slice, and then in bracket notation for assignment, and then dot push. So these are pretty, kind of pretty nifty things, and after all, you'll be able to manipulate an array however you want. Yep, and then includes is kind of like index of. It's like a search function as well, except this will just tell you, hey, this exists, or hey, it doesn't exist. It doesn't really tell you where it is. So another thing for you to use if you want to use it. It returns back a Boolean, which in a lot of cases, it might be lighter weight. You might just say, hey, I just need to know yes or no. I don't care where it is necessarily. Dot reverse, you call that on an array, and it will reverse the original array. So with any array methods, so I know I'm going through these, and when you do the problems yourself, I'll hold that thought until the very end. But when you're using an array method, always be careful if something is returning back a new array, or if it's changing the original array, right? If it's returning a new array, then you need to capture the value of that array somewhere. Otherwise, it kind of disappears, right? And if it changes the original array, then you're fine. But just notice that anything else that was using that original array, they're also now going to be using the new array as well. So when we do names.reverse, it just takes the original array and literally reverses it. Nothing too fancy there.
Sorry, so if you wanted to reverse a copy of this array, you would slice it and then just reverse the slice.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yep. And so those are the basic ones for now. In today's workshop, you're actually going to be creating a lot of these from scratch. So if the problem is like, hey, create index of, don't use index of in your solution, kind of defeats the purpose, right? So as you go through it, what we want you to do is we want you to understand how these methods are working kind of behind the scenes, right? So when I stand up here and say, oh yeah, this just searches the array and gives you the first match, what does that really mean? How would you build that? And they're actually not that complex, but we just want you to be able to build it yourself so you understand what you're using when you use it, right? So if it says, if it wants you to mimic a dot reverse or a dot slice, please don't use a dot slice or a dot reverse in your solution, right? We want you to kind of build it from the ground up. But yeah, any questions about arrays, Sophie?
Yeah. So when we are removing items from the array, we can use shift to remove them from the start or pop from the end. But what about the middle?
Yeah, tomorrow we'll talk about removing things from the middle.
Okay.
There's something called dot splice that does that for you. But dot splice is a little bit more complex, a little bit more involved. So we'll talk about it tomorrow.
Cool.
Yeah. We'll talk about how to add things in the middle and also how to take things away from the middle too. So we'll kind of kill both of those birds.
Any other questions?